Hello, in the following video I wanted to show you how to paint a non-metallic sword on our Space Marine, and here you have my selection of colors that I will use. So you can see that for non-metallic metal we need a big contrast, for it to be visible and shining. So we are starting from a black color. I use this one because it's a little glossy, so it will have a lot of depth to it. And also here you can see the final highlight, the reflection of light in the metal. It will be white. The other colors, you can see some differences. Petroleum gray is a dark color, but it's gray with additions of brown, so it's warm. Then we are going to go to colors that are a little cold in the mid-tone. This will be the base color of the steel sword, and some of the highlights you can see will be a little warm, so they will reflect maybe the surrounding, maybe the light source that is not that cold. So we want to generate such differences because the base color of the sword is this. Adding warm tones to the shadows and to the highlights will show us the true bluish color of the mixture. And if, of course, we can switch some colors. If you would add more cold color to the shadow and more cold colors to the highlights, everything would be cold gray colors and you wouldn't see the difference. This is the selection of colors we want to use. Also as auxiliary colors, just to sometimes change, add more warm temperature, we'll use Rhinox hide and tar brown. Tar brown will be used for maybe this displays mid-tones and highlights, and Rhinox hide for shadows. So in some places we will want to add even more stronger warm colors, so that's why I selected those two. So we can see it on the wet palette. So you can see that I've prepared those colors on my wet palette. Normally, as you saw, I've used less mixes, but here I want a bigger variety in the mid-tones and highlights also. So adding all those other colors generates more layers that I must apply on the miniature, but we have a lot of variety, and also we have those two auxiliary colors that will help us to sometimes color some places to change the temperature.
20 minutes later.
Okay, so you can see that I've covered the sword with a thin layer of a mixture of petroleum black and gray and black. So it's very dark in this place, but it's a good place to start. I always, for non-metallic metal, I almost always start from a very dark color. I don't want to shade, because I wanted to achieve a deep shadow. So now, starting from maybe something like a mid-tone, we can add a little more color. Let's sketch the placement of light. So here we have the line. We know that the light falls from above, so looking at the blade, the upper part of the blade will be brighter. In general, the lower part should be darker, and also the lower part should reflect maybe something of the surrounding. Maybe here in this place there will be visible tones of the ground, maybe something that is close to this marine. So here we can change the color of the blade a little using our warm tones. But let's sketch the highlight. So here at the tip of the blade, and it's even more interesting to show the tip, because if you can see the miniature, most of the light will be focused here. So adding additional focal point at the tip of the blade will generate a big contrast and will give space for the non-metallic metal to shine a little more. So sometimes it's very important to place all the highlights in right space, just to show something interesting. And also, as a rule of thumb, you can always think about placing highlights like this, and then the following surface that is close to it should be dark. So this will generate a big contrast between the light reflected here and the shadow here. So this part will shine even more. And then here we should keep a dark space, just for additional contrast. And here also there will be a highlight, maybe a smaller one, but it will be here. Yeah, so that's the upper part. And on the lower part, we want to keep this line of separation maybe as dark as it can get, so maybe coloring only the edge of the blade. You can add a highlight in the middle, yeah, and just a small outline here, something like this. Yeah, so here there will be more reflected light, and here two highlights. So let's add a little more to the sketch. So now let's add more brighter colors to the sketch. So at the bottom we want further to make a big difference. Also the line of the sword can also be brighter. And here, that. Just remember it's only a sketch, so we will refine it later. And also here, close to the hilt. And here on the tip. So we can see that it's also gaining more contrast. Also it will be very important to generate the edge highlight here. So next up, maybe use something like this, almost the final highlight, and add it on the end. And here. So this will be our plan to execute on this sword. Also we want to keep this space a little darker, because at the end we will paint all those details in red, so that they are shining with energy, adding a OSL effect. And for OSL effects we need a space that is darker for them to be visible. Okay, so now let's start refining this. So let's jump to a smaller brush. Starting from the shadows, let's use black. Let's use black just to add more depth to all the shadow areas. You can also outline all the lines that are combining the elements on the sword. If you don't want the shadows to be pure black, you can always mix them a little with very deep dark blue. So they will be a little more in line with colors, but I know that I will add more colors when combining the other elements, such as the hilt that will be gold, and also here all the elements that will shine with red, so it will change later. So now let's add more the standard tone, maybe Now maybe we can add more shadow even here. Just small space. So starting from the upper part, let's focus on one place. You can add more highlights. You can see that the petroleum gray adds more warmth to the surface. We can start highlighting. Can jump around a little to the other side, so we give the occasion for the paint to dry a little. So you can see that I also want to focus on the edge in the middle of the sword. As I mentioned it in a previous video, I often don't clean the brush between taking different tones. Most of the time it can be damaging for the brush, but it's also helpful because the paint mixes on the brush, so it's easier to get smooth transitions. Of course, also we can change directions of the brush strokes just to achieve smooth blends. So the upper part should be cold. Here we should be able to see the full color of the blade and a blue tone in it. And the lower part we will keep a little warmer. We'll add additional colors to it. This is just a simple effect of painting non-metallic metals. In fact, it's a more complicated topic that we'll try to cover it in future materials. So you can see that I'm adding highlights. Also the sketch helps us a little, because even if I'm adding not that bright colors, that they will be more visible on a bright undercoat. Also, if you want the blade to be a little damaged, maybe you can add some effects of chipping on the edges, something that is, maybe he clashed the sword into a surface that is, and it's left a mark. so during the highlighting process you can add some small irregularities. If you will keep them delicate, they will blend and add to the overall feeling of the blade. So for the final highlights, we want to focus on the curve of the blade here. So just to show how the blade is, the shape of the tip of the blade. Also here I want to add more highlights and closer to the edge, not here. Maybe this will be the last highlight that I will place here. So also we can add some small details. As always, on the run, don't add scratches and damage marks when you finish the blade, because sometimes you make something too thin or something too small or something too big, and you want to change the shape, and on a finished blade probably you will have to again make the transition smooth, and it will cost you a lot of work. And also painting something very bright can make the surface look unnatural, so we want to avoid it. So you can see that on the run I add small scratches. Also the edge highlight. This will give us a lot of detail on the end. So as mentioned earlier, we want to work on the curve of the blade here. So let's add more highlight here on this place. You can see that I'm painting small streaks just to accent on this space. If you generate a big difference, you can always go back 1-2 shades, so it will be easier to modulate and also to smooth the transition. Some scratch marks. So maybe a little more here. Let's mix those colors a little, because sometimes when you paint a long time, the paint will separate, the pigment will separate from the medium, so it's good to mix the colors on the palette just a little for them to cover better. So you can see that for the final highlights the contrast is beginning to show, beginning to be strong, and that's what we want. So we want to have a big difference that's visible, and that makes the effect of non-metallic metal to shine. Also, I recommend to use strong white, because you want the white to be very shiny, we want it to be visible on the final surface. Some pigments aren't that strong. Some people use artist pigments for it. I use the scale primer, sometimes the normal scale paint, just to do it. So I generated a big difference here, and I want to smoothen the transition a little, so I've gone back some tones, and using dots only, I want to add a little of mid-tone, just to look for it to look more natural. And this is almost white. You can also accent the edge even more with it, so it will shine even more in general. Okay. And the final highlight of pure white, that will add us a little more contrast. So you can see most of the time I make small dots, small lines, just to generate texture, but also it adds a feeling of irregularity on the blade. So one side of the blade is finished, yeah? So you can see that it has a lot of contrast between pure white and pure black, yeah? So now we want to paint the lower side here, and also I intentionally left this place very dark, because we will add a OSL effect to this place, and it will fill this surface a little more, and also add variety in color, because we want to add a red color here also for the eyes. So it will even more show the bluish colors on the blade. But now let's focus on the lower side. Yeah. So maybe let's rotate a little. So you can see that the blade is the lower highlight should be in the place where here you have the darkest place, because we want to have the difference. So here it's bright, here is dark, here is bright, here is dark, and here is dark, here is bright. Yeah, we want it to be on the opposite side of the blade. But also we can look at this in a logical manner. So when the light falls from above, it will catch on this edge, and also maybe here a little, maybe a secondary reflection from the surrounding. And the bottom side should be darker because it will catch less light, but maybe here you can see something reflected from the surrounding. Yeah? So starting from the darkest colors, we can fix a little the line that is combining these two surfaces, because when painting the other side, you can go to this one, maybe the line won't be that visible. But now let's fix this. It will look more aesthetic. Yeah, and then we can apply more highlights. Just here. And it's important for this part to just do it with such streaks, such lines. So we want to leave this place dark. Maybe a little on here. Also, we can add more warm colors because the light that is reflected from the surrounding can have different colors. Okay, so let's add a little of the color that we prepared to modulate all the reflections. So it's pure Rhinox height, but it will generate a cool difference, because here the colors will look more warm, and on the upper part all the colors will look cold. So the color of the steel will be more visible on the upper part. And we want that sort of contrast on miniatures. We want to generate differences in temperature, we want to show different things. So it's always good to think what surroundings the miniature occupies. In our case, I envision it as a old manufactory that will have a lot of rust, maybe worn surfaces. So we can add a lot of brown to the base. Maybe even orange. Something that will work well with the whole miniature, but it will give a big contrast, because now the main color on the armor is blue. Most of the miniature is called blue. So if we will put him on a base that is also cold and maybe blue or gray, he won't be that visible. But if we will put him on a base that is warm and maybe in complementary colors, the miniature will be very, very visible. But also all the colors that are complementary will give us a big difference, and they will be more saturated, more visible in the end result. So we want to think about this when planning colors on miniatures. but more about this later in later materials. So you can see we want to focus on maybe this place, because now I added some highlights in different places, but most of them should be here. Maybe even only this edge can be a little more highlighted. So we can rotate the miniature a little. Remember, it's good to paint edge highlights with the side of your brush, not with the tip, so you won't miss the edge. And you can paint thin, very thin edge highlights this way. You want them to be as delicate as they can be. Also, let's go back a little to our brown color, maybe add a little more water, so to generate a kind of filter that we can use to blend this surface. Just with small dots, just to change the temperature. Okay, let's go back to highlights. So one thing mentioning is that on the secondary reflection, that is something reflected from the ground, we don't want to use the full spectrum of contrast that we used on the upper part, because we want to show that here we have the reflection of the light source, but here that's only the bouncing light that is reflected from the surrounding. So here we'll add less highlights. So only to a part. Maybe cutting out those 3 last colors will be sufficient. So you can see that I'm also changing the amount of the surface that I'm covering with those colors, so it's less and less with each highlight. Also can add some scratches as earlier, just to start doing it gradually. Don't do super bright sketches from the start. Okay. And let's say the final highlight we will make with the warm color. Even if you will generate a big difference now, but we want to add warm colors to the highlight because, as I mentioned earlier, it's reflected light. Even if the difference is too big, then we can always go back a little, overpaint it with some a little darker colors, darker shades, but we want this color to be visible here. Okay, so we can see we have finished painting the sword. So as planned, here we have the reflection of the main light source that is coming from above and reflecting in the blade. And here we have a small reflection of the surroundings on the bottom of the blade. The upper part is mostly in cold colors, and the lower part is mostly in cold colors, but modulated with some brown tones and some warm colors like we used with additions of bright brown.